The Russian dictator Putin stated that all of Ukraine is supposedly Russian, and that Russia is ready to capture the city of Sumy. He also demanded that Ukraine recognize all his territorial claims, as well as refuse to join any international unions or alliances at all. And if this seems to you like something the dictator has repeated more than once, here's a new dose of nonsense from the Russian president. Putin has officially forbidden the Russian economy from declining or stagnating and has ordered it, quote, to only grow. But the paradox in this situation isn't even that. It's that after such absurd statements from Putin, American President Donald Trump announced some progress in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine regarding ending the war. Now let's discuss all of this together, the absurd statement from Putin and Donald Trump's reaction. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as soon as it comes in. So, I'll start this episode with the delusional statements of the dictator Putin. Yes, Russians who are watching this episode, I consider all the statements of the bold dictator to be nonsense, and Putin himself to be insane. Just keep that in mind. So, despite the ongoing daily bombings of Ukrainian cities, during which dozens of civilians are killed and injured, Vladimir Putin, president of the Russian Federation, declared that he views Russians and Ukrainians as a single people. Quote, I have already said that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian people to be one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours, declared dictator Putin during his speech at the so-called International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg. Putin also spoke about an allegedly ancient rule, according to which, in his opinion, territory captured by the Russian army becomes the property of Moscow. Another quote from him. You know, we have an old rule, wherever the foot of a Russian soldier steps, that is ours. Well, hinting that it will never return the occupied lands. At the same time, according to Putin, the Kremlin has no desire to force Kiev to surrender. Russia insists that Ukraine recognize the realities that have developed on the ground. That's how he commented on the moderator's statement at this forum session that ROE5's position on Ukraine is similar to President Donald Trump's demand for Iran's surrender in the context of its nuclear weapons program. In addition, Putin stated that he does not rule out the further capture of a Ukrainian city. Sumy and the Russian army, quote, we don't have the task of taking Sumy, but in principle, I do not rule it out. However, he noted no such task exists currently. Units of the Russian armed forces continue their offensive in Ukraine in all directions. And here's the paradox by making such statements. However, this does not stop the deranged president of so-called Russia from claiming that the Russian Federation has repeatedly, at every stage of the war, supposedly offered Ukraine to negotiate a ceasefire. Quote, we said, let's negotiate now, because the logic of the development of military actions may lead to your situation getting worse. And then we will have to negotiate with you from different positions, ones that are worse for you. This happens several times, says Putin, and I have witnesses to this. Well, here the Russian society kind of wants to say Ukraine. The United States of America proposed a complete ceasefire for 30 days in March. This is the very suspension of hostilities that Putin is talking about now. Putin refused and started dodging, telling them he wanted negotiations on May 15th in Istanbul. That's it, no ceasefire. Then he chickened out, got scared, and didn't fly to Istanbul at all. Now he says, at every stage of the war, I actually suggested suspending hostilities. Well, after this batch of nonsense, Putin once again voiced the conditions that, in his opinion, must be met to end Russian aggression. Among them are Kiev's agreement to a neutral status, refusal to participate in all foreign alliances, renunciation of the pursuit of nuclear weapons, as well as recognition of the results of the so-called referendums held by Russia in the occupied Ukrainian territories. And now pay attention. Putin emphasized that Moscow insists on the recognition of these pseudo-referendums, and warned that ignoring them means the likelihood of the armed conflict resuming. He also repeated that Russia was supposedly close to reaching an agreement with Ukraine during the negotiations in Istanbul in 2020. And then a quote from Pleshivov. I hope that the current Ukrainian leadership will follow national interests, not the interests of third parties. The West does not want to end the war and is using Ukraine as a tool against Russia. Ukraine deserves a better fate than to be a tool in the hands of external parties acting against Russia. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, responded to Vladimir Putin's statement. And, according to him, Vladimir Putin has become a mass murderer of Russian Federation soldiers and is showing complete disregard for the efforts of the United States to resolve the conflict. Sybiha called Putin's rhetoric a de facto admission of his intention to continue seizing Ukrainian territories. The Ukrainian diplomat paid special attention to this phrase about the foot of the Russian soldier, which brings only death, destruction, and devastation. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine stated that Putin doesn't care about the legs of Russian soldiers torn off by Ukrainian drones. Putin is a murderer of his own people. When Putin says that wherever the foot of a Russian soldier steps, it's ours, those feet are being torn off by Ukrainian drones. According to Sybiha, Putin doesn't care about the feet of those Russian soldiers. But personally, I was once again more shocked not by the Kremlin dictator. That's all clear, he's crazy, that's obvious. I was more shocked by the American president. United States President Donald Trump stated that there has been some progress in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine regarding ending the war. And this statement by Trump came just shortly after Putin called Ukraine ours, as he says, and allowed for the possibility of capturing the city of Sumy. But let me quote Trump, there is some progress in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Sometimes you need to be tough, but at the same time remain a peacemaker. I have just one question for Donald Trump. Where exactly did he show toughness? Where was it? Here are the supporters of Donald Trump who for months have been saying, Alexei Pechi, you just don't understand his deeper plan. Could you please write in the comments, where is the toughness? Perhaps I'm the only one who doesn't see it. It's possible everyone else does, and I'm alone in not seeing it. But I'll finish this episode with another quote from Putin. And so you have a complete picture of the Russian president's inadequacy. Putin has basically forbidden the Russian economy from falling and stagnating. Putin basically said just that. The Russian economy must by no means fall or stagnate. According to Putin, despite what he calls a difficult external environment, Russia's gross domestic product has grown by more than 4% annually over the past 2 years, which means it has been growing faster than the global average. But now the situation has changed. According to Rosstat, by the end of March, economic growth had slowed to less than 1.5%. And quarter on quarter, the economy began to shrink for the first time since 2022. The day before, at the St. Petersburg Forum, Russia's Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, stated that Russia is on the verge of an economic downturn. Then, the head of the Central Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiullina, warned that the economic resources that had allowed growth throughout this period of war and sanctions have been completely exhausted. Nabiullina stated that this encompasses the workforce and the idle capacities of factories, and, which is very important, the reserves of the National Wealth Fund of the Russian Federation, whose liquid assets have been spent since the beginning of the war. This is a statement from the head of the central bank. Moreover, on Friday morning, the head of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, Alexander Shokin, stated that many companies are in a pre-default state. And the main owner of Severstal, Russia's second richest billionaire, Alexei Mordashov, reported the threat of mass bankruptcies due to the high key interest rate and falling demand. And you know what Putin said in response to all this? He publicly stated that he doesn't believe any of the previous speakers and accused them of spreading unjustified, gloomy forecasts. And after that, and this is not a joke, Putin stated that by the year 2030, the poverty rate in Russia should decrease to 5%. The country should switch to a high-wage economy, increase oil and gas exports, enter the global top 20 in terms of business conditions, boost investments by 60%, and raise funding for research and development to 2% of gross domestic product. As for the sanctions, Putin once again repeated that, quote, only Russia's adversaries will suffer from them. Write your opinion about the level of adequacy of the Russian president in the comments, and in general, share your conclusions. Maybe, like me, you were confused or shocked by the statement. No, not Putin, but Donald Trump, about the fact that apparently there is some progress in negotiations to end the war. That's all for now, friends. Please subscribe, hit the bell, and like the video. If you want to support this channel financially, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video, or by using the quick response code on your screens. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.